During my placement, I experienced a situation in which a child became excluded from the subculture of the classroom due to the extent of the inclusive measures placed within the setting. For this reason, we have chosen to discuss the balancing act of inclusion.
Inclusion refers to the restructure of educational provision to promote belonging, but this child was receiving one-to-one support, distancing him from his peers. By providing these interventions to influence attainment, he lost many opportunities for social experiences. His classmates would comment on how he was absent during whole class teaching, and this emphasised to me the partition created between the child and his peers.
Is this the inclusive practice we should strive for?
Thomas touches on the idea that inclusion is dependent on a child being assimilated into the classroom situation, but can it be argued that in a lot of cases where children are being supported one-to-one, that they are not being integrated into their environment?
This had a negative effect on the social bonds that the child should form within his class environment, and in turn heavily impacted on his social well-being. Inclusion carries many different meanings and definitions, however in its simplest form it is to be included. As we know, this can be a far more complex notion for us as practitioners to provide for the children in our classroom.
However, I observed a contrast in practice in which a child was provided with minimal support in an attempt to prevent him being seen as different. This is an example of the blind approach towards SEN, which we have examined in the unit. In an attempt to divert attention from the child's needs to promote social inclusion, the teacher excluded him from his peers in an academic sense.
This shows the other end of the spectrum of inclusion, as the teacher did not cater for all the pupil's needs out of fear of highlighting his differences. The reluctance to address the pupil's specific needs to promote inclusion within the class subculture did not fully assimilate the child. The teacher did not take the required steps to ensure that the child was able to access the same curriculum content as his peers, and therefore inclusive practice was not achieved.
Effective inclusive practice often requires that teachers give up traditional attitudes, and due to this teacher's previous experiences, he had adopted the blind approach in this situation. As we know, teaching is a continuously developing profession in which we must constantly adapt our practice. This requires us to treat each child as an individual and be versatile in our approach.
The attempt to include the child socially into the class has lessened the child's ability to integrate academically, and this again highlights to us that the inclusion that we strive for is often difficult to balance.
The Code of Practice emphasises that the child is at the heart of SEN provision, so the balance of inclusion should be based around the child parental agency as well as the teachers. This means that every case of inclusion will be different, and it is our duty to tailor our practice in accordance to this agency.
There will always be issues finding the right balance for the child, but as practitioners we must ensure that we are not only focusing on their educational attainment, but also on the child's overall well-being.
As we reflect on how difficult it is to find the perfect balance, we now recognise inclusion to be a compromise between social and intellectual well-being, a balance that will continuously evolve during our professional development.